Someday, and that day may never come, I'll call upon you to do a service. But until that day, accept this justice as a gift on my daughter's wedding day.
In 1972, a movie came out that didn't just top the box office, it rewrote the rules of Hollywood forever. The Godfather is one of those rare films that people who weren't even alive when it released still talk about with reverence. But behind that masterpiece is a story filled with near disasters, explosive arguments, shocking secrets, and decisions that could have made it one of the biggest flops in history. Stick around, because by the time we get to number 1, you'll never see this film the same way again. Number 1, the studio flat out refused to cast Marlon Brando. Let's start with the most jaw-dropping casting battle in Hollywood history. When Francis Ford Coppola pushed for Marlon Brando to play Vito Corleone, Paramount Pictures executives didn't just hesitate, they said absolutely not. And they meant it. By 1971, Brando had a reputation in Hollywood as a box office disaster. His last several films had flopped badly. Studios saw him as difficult, unpredictable, and box office poison. Paramount chief Stanley Jaffe reportedly declared that Brando would never appear in a Paramount film. Coppola was so desperate to get Brando into the role that he had to fight, negotiate, and ultimately accept humiliating conditions just to get the man in front of a camera. Brando agreed to a screen test, something almost unheard of for an established star of his stature. And he also agreed to post a bond guaranteeing he wouldn't cause production delays. That screen test changed everything. The moment the executives saw the footage, they couldn't deny it. Brando transformed before their eyes into the Godfather. The man they had outright refused was now the only possible choice. Without Coppola's stubborn determination, the film would have been a very different and very inferior picture. Number 2. Brando stuffed his cheeks with cotton balls for the audition. Here's where it gets fascinating. For that pivotal screen test, Marlon Brando didn't just walk in and deliver lines. He completely transformed himself, without a single makeup artist, without a costume designer, and without any studio assistance. Brando stuffed his cheeks with cotton balls and used shoe polish to darken his hair. He hunched his posture, lowered his voice to a raspy whisper, and invented the physical character of Vito Corleone almost entirely on his own, in the room, on the spot. The character's distinctive gravelly voice, that slightly slurred, hushed delivery that became instantly iconic, that was Brando's improvised invention. He later had a dental device made to keep that jaw shape consistent throughout the film. Think about that for a moment. One of the most imitated, most quoted, most iconic characters in cinema history. The man behind it all created that look and sound with cotton balls and shoe polish. Sometimes genius doesn't need a budget, it just needs imagination and the will to go for it. Number 3. Al Pacino was nearly fired during production. Al Pacino's performance as Michael Corleone is now considered one of the greatest in film history. But for the first weeks of shooting, Paramount executives wanted him gone. The studio brass watched the early dailies, or the raw footage shot each day, and they hated what they saw. Pacino was quiet. He was restrained. He barely raised his voice. The executives couldn't see the star power. They pushed hard to have him replaced, and the pressure on Coppola was immense. Coppola refused to back down. He saw exactly what Pacino was doing. A slow, deliberate transformation of a man from innocence to absolute power. That stillness wasn't weakness. It was the whole point. The turning point came during the restaurant scene, the moment where Michael shoots Sollozzo and McCluskey. Audiences and executives alike finally understood. The quiet, watchful young man they'd been impatient with just revealed himself to be the most dangerous person in the room. After that scene, nobody talked about replacing Pacino again. Number 4. Frank Sinatra was furious about Johnny Fontane. If you've ever watched The Godfather and wondered whether the character of Johnny Fontane, the singer who begs the Corleone family for help getting a movie role, was based on a real person, you weren't alone. And neither was Frank Sinatra. Sinatra was convinced the character was a direct portrayal of him. He was furious. In Mario Puzo's novel, the parallels were hard to ignore. A famous Italian-American singer connected to powerful men, desperate for a Hollywood comeback. The story goes that at a party, Sinatra confronted Puzo directly, calling him a pimp and far worse in front of a crowd of people. Puzo, who had deeply admired Sinatra's music his whole life, was reportedly stunned and shaken by the encounter. Puzo always denied Fontane was specifically based on Sinatra, saying the character was a composite. But the fury was real, and the confrontation became one of Hollywood's most legendary off-screen dramas. Proof that sometimes the stories surrounding a film are just as explosive as anything on screen. Number 5. The cat in the opening scene was a stray found on set. The very first image of the Godfather is unforgettable. Vito Corleone sits in shadow, speaking in that hushed, dangerous voice while stroking a cat in his lap. It's one of cinema's most iconic opening shots. Composed, powerful, deliberate. The cat was completely unplanned. On the day of shooting, Coppola spotted a stray cat wandering around the Paramount lot. On a whim, he handed it to Brando before the cameras rolled. Brando, ever the instinctive performer, simply incorporated it. He draped the cat across his lap, began stroking it, and the scene was born. There was one small problem. The cat purred so loudly during takes that it nearly drowned out Brando's dialogue. The sound team had to work to clean up the audio in post-production. That accidental cat, the one that nearly ruined the sound, ended up becoming a symbol of understated menace that film scholars have analyzed for decades. Not bad for a stray. Number 6. The horse head was real. Possibly the most shocking scene in the film, and one of the most shocking in movie history, is the moment Jack Woltz wakes up in his bed and finds the severed head of his prized horse beneath the sheets. The scream, the blood soaking through white silk, the horror on his face. That horse head was not a prop. It was real. The production team sourced an actual horse's head from a dog food company in New Jersey, a horse that had already been slaughtered for that purpose. The head was kept refrigerated and brought to set on the day of the scene. John Marley, the actor playing Woltz, reportedly did not know a real horse head would be used. His scream of absolute visceral horror in the scene, that may have been entirely genuine. When audiences reacted with such intense shock to that scene, few realized that the realism they were responding to was completely, disturbingly literal. It's a moment that crosses a line most films wouldn't dare approach, and it's been disturbing audiences for over 50 years as a result. Number 7. James Caan improvised the emotion in the toll booth scene. The assassination of Sonny Corleone at the toll booth is a masterpiece of filmmaking. Relentless, brutal, almost unbearably violent for its time. It remains one of the most viscerally impactful death scenes in cinema. But what you may not know is how deeply James Caan committed to making it real. Caan researched actual gunshot wounds and worked closely with the special effects team on how the body reacts to being hit by multiple bullets. He insisted on the physical authenticity of the scene, the jerking, the stumbling, the inability to fall gracefully. The emotional reality Caan brought to those final moments was drawn from personal instinct and physical preparation, not from a script direction that said, "Die convincingly." He simply understood Sonny Corleone so completely that he knew how that man, big, proud, explosive, would die. Coppola later said Caan's performance in that sequence was one of the most committed pieces of physical acting he had ever witnessed on a set. The audience felt it. They still do. Number 8. The film was shot almost entirely in sequence. Hollywood almost never shoots films in order. It's expensive and logistically complicated. Scenes are grouped by location, by actor availability, by lighting conditions. A scene from the end of a movie might be filmed on day 2 of production. It's simply how the industry works. The Godfather was a dramatic exception. Coppola made the unusual decision to shoot the film largely in chronological order, from beginning to end, following the story as it unfolds. The reason was intentional and artistic. Coppola wanted the actors, particularly Al Pacino, to genuinely live through Michael Corleone's transformation. He didn't want Pacino to jump back and forth between innocent young war hero and cold, calculating Don. He wanted the change to happen organically, in real time, on camera. The result speaks for itself. Michael's arc across the film feels earned in a way that is rarely achieved in cinema. You watch a man disappear and something else take his place, and the actors experience that disappearance right alongside their characters. Number 9. Paramount wanted a cheap, fast B-movie. Today, The Godfather is spoken of with reverence as a prestige Hollywood production. The reality of how it was conceived inside Paramount Pictures is considerably less flattering. When Paramount acquired the rights to Mario Puzo's novel, the studio's initial plan was to make a low-budget, quickly produced crime film set in the present day. Not the 1940s, not with elaborate period sets, not with A-list stars. They wanted something cheap and fast that could cash in on the novel's popularity before interest faded. The budget was minimal. There was serious discussion of shooting the entire film in locations like Kansas City to reduce costs. The period setting, which gives the film so much of its weight and visual grandeur, was almost cut entirely. It was Coppola, along with Puzo and producer Robert Evans, who fought to preserve the scope and period authenticity of the story. They understood that stripping away the world of the 1940s would strip away the soul of the film. They were right, and Paramount reluctantly came around. Number 10. Coppola was not the first or second director choice. Francis Ford Coppola is so completely identified with The Godfather that it's almost impossible to imagine anyone else in the director's chair. But by the time the job landed with Coppola, Paramount had already approached, and had been turned down by or turned away from a remarkable list of filmmakers. Among those considered or approached, Sergio Leone, the legendary Italian director of the spaghetti western films, who declined. Costa Gavras, the political thriller director, was considered. Peter Bogdanovich, coming off the success of The Last Picture Show, turned it down. Arthur Penn was also reportedly in discussions. Paramount eventually settled on Coppola partly because he was young, relatively inexpensive, and, crucially, Italian-American. The studio believed his background would lend cultural authenticity to the material and help smooth over any objections from Italian-American community groups. What they got instead was a visionary who turned their reluctant compromise picture into the highest-grossing film in history up to that point, and one of the most celebrated works of art the 20th century produced. Number 11. Mario Puzo had never written a screenplay before. The screenplay for The Godfather is considered one of the finest ever written. It won the Academy Award for Best Adapted Screenplay. It is studied in film schools around the world. Lines from it have entered the permanent fabric of American culture. Mario Puzo, who co-wrote it with Coppola, had never written a screenplay before in his life. Puzo was a novelist, and until the Godfather novel became a sensation, not a particularly well-known one. He wrote the screenplay by learning the craft as he went, working in close collaboration with Coppola, who guided the structural and cinematic elements while Puzo brought the characters and dialogue he knew so deeply from the novel. The partnership was occasionally tense. Both men were strong-willed and had clear visions, but the friction produced something extraordinary. Puzo's feel for these characters, combined with Coppola's instinct for what plays on screen, created a script so tightly constructed and so emotionally precise that it has rarely been matched in the decades since. Number 12. The word mafia was banned from the entire film. Here is something that surprises almost everyone. In a film entirely about organized crime and the Italian-American mob, the word mafia is never spoken, not once. Go back and watch it. You will not hear it. This was not a creative choice. It was a direct result of pressure applied to Paramount Pictures before production even began. The Italian-American Civil Rights League, led by Joe Colombo, himself a real organized crime figure, organized protests and campaigns against the film, arguing it would damage the reputation of Italian Americans by associating their culture with criminality. The League was effective enough that Paramount and the producers agreed to remove the words mafia and Cosa Nostra entirely from the script. The fact that a real organized crime boss successfully lobbied a Hollywood studio to alter a film about organized crime is one of the most darkly absurd stories in cinema history. And yet, the film lost nothing from the exclusion. The world Coppola created speaks for itself without ever needing to name what it is. Number 13. The iconic theme was recycled from an earlier film. Nino Rota's score for The Godfather is one of the most recognized pieces of music in film history. That haunting, mournful trumpet melody has been used in cultural moments, parodies, tributes, and ceremonies for over 50 years. It is, in the minds of millions of people, the sound of power and melancholy combined. Here's what most people don't know. Rota had used a version of that melody in a much earlier, far less serious film. An Italian comedy from 1958 called Fortunella. When the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences discovered this, they rescinded Rota's Oscar nomination for Best Original Score, ruling the music was not original. The nomination was withdrawn. The music's official standing was complicated. None of it mattered to audiences. The melody had found its perfect home in The Godfather, and its earlier appearance in a forgotten Italian comedy is a footnote that almost no one remembers. The music belongs to the Corleones now, and it always will. Number 14. The film was almost disqualified from the Oscars. The Godfather went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, Best Actor, and Best Adapted Screenplay at the 1973 ceremony. It is one of the most celebrated Oscar wins in history, but it almost wasn't eligible at all. Academy rules require films to have a qualifying theatrical run in Los Angeles County by the end of the calendar year to be eligible for that year's ceremony. The Godfather's release date and distribution schedule created real uncertainty about whether it would meet the deadline in time to qualify for the 1972 awards cycle. The logistics were managed, barely, and the film squeaked into eligibility. But the near miss is a reminder of how differently history could have unfolded. Not just for the film, but for the careers of Coppola, Pacino, Brando, and everyone involved. A film that redefined American cinema and launched some of the greatest careers in Hollywood history nearly missed its chance at the awards recognition that cemented its legacy. The margin was that thin. Number 15. It broke every box office record of its time. The commercial success of The Godfather was not just impressive, it was seismic. Upon its release in March 1972, the film shattered records at a speed and scale the industry had never seen before. Within its first few weeks, it became the highest-grossing film in history, surpassing even Gone with the Wind when adjusted for the era. It earned back its production budget many times over. Theaters were turning people away. Lines stretched around blocks. In some cities, the film ran 24 hours a day to meet demand. By the end of its initial run, The Godfather had earned over $245 million domestically. An almost incomprehensible number for 1972. Adjusted for inflation, that figure would be well over $1 billion today. The success didn't just validate Coppola and rescue Paramount from financial difficulty. It fundamentally changed how studios thought about the commercial potential of serious adult drama. It proved that prestige and profit were not mutually exclusive. Hollywood has never been the same since. Number 16. Robert Duvall wore a wig, is by and hated every second of it. Robert Duvall's portrayal of Tom Hagen, the Corleone family's cool and calculating consigliere, is a masterclass in quiet authority. Duvall brings an intelligent restraint to the role that perfectly counterbalances the more explosive personalities around him. What viewers never knew was that Duvall spent the entire production wearing a wig, and by all accounts, he found the experience deeply uncomfortable. The wig was required because Duvall's natural look didn't match the character's appearance as written and imagined. Duvall has spoken over the years with considerable candor about his discomfort during filming, both with the physical experience of wearing the hairpiece and with certain aspects of the production. He has had a notably complicated relationship with the film's legacy, grateful for what it did for his career, but not always warmly nostalgic about the making of it. It's a reminder that even in the most celebrated productions, the experience of making the film and the product itself can be very different things. Number 17. Diane Keaton was cast, partly because Coppola had a crush on her. Diane Keaton's casting as Kay Adams, the all-American girlfriend who gradually gets pulled into the Corleone orbit, has an origin story that is both charming and a little eyebrow-raising by modern standards. Coppola has acknowledged over the years that he was personally enchanted by Keaton, who was at the time primarily a stage actress and comedian known for her work with Woody Allen. His attraction to her as a person influenced his enthusiasm for her as a casting choice for the film. Whatever the motivation behind the initial interest, Keaton earned her place completely. Her performance as Kay, particularly in the final scene, where she watches the door close on Michael's world and her expression shifts from hope to devastating comprehension, is one of the most powerful wordless moments in the film. She returned for both sequels and remained the emotional anchor of Michael's humanity throughout the trilogy, a crush that led to inspired casting. Hollywood has stranger origin stories, but not many. Number 18. The Corleone family was based on real documented mob families. Mario Puzo insisted throughout his life that The Godfather was a work of fiction and that he invented the Corleone family entirely from imagination. There's just one problem with that claim. The parallels to real organized crime families are extraordinarily specific. The structure of the Corleone family, with its carefully defined hierarchy, its code of silence, its rituals of loyalty and betrayal, its relationship with politics and law enforcement, all of it maps closely onto the documented operations of real New York crime families, particularly the Gambino and Genovese families. FBI agents who worked organized crime cases in the 1970s reportedly used the film and novel as informal training tools, citing how accurately Puzo had captured the culture and structure of these organizations. How a man who claimed no first-hand knowledge managed to recreate that world so precisely remains one of the great unanswered questions about the book's origins. Whether Puzo had sources he never acknowledged, or whether his imagination was simply that precise, the result was a portrait of organized crime that law enforcement considered nearly journalistic in its accuracy. Number 19. Coppola cried during filming, and it ended up in the final cut. Filmmaking is an intensely emotional undertaking, but directors typically keep their personal reactions off camera. The camera is pointed at the actors. What happens behind the lens stays behind the lens. During the filming of one of the most emotional scenes in the movie, a scene involving a death and a grief-stricken reaction, Coppola was so moved by what his actors were creating in front of him that he began to cry. The sound of his crying was faintly picked up by the production microphones. When the scene was edited, rather than cutting away or re-recording clean audio, Coppola and his editor made the decision to leave the ambient sound as it was, including the barely audible sound of the director's own grief in the background. It is one of the most intimate details in the film, an invisible signature that almost no one knows is there. The director's tears, quietly embedded in a scene about loss, heard by no one who doesn't already know to listen for them. Number 20. The studio wanted to cut the film down to 90 minutes. The Godfather runs for 2 hours and 57 minutes. That runtime is inseparable from the film's power. The slow build of the first act, the weight of the family dynamics, the gradual tightening of the trap around Michael. Every scene earns its place. Paramount executives, after seeing an early cut, pushed hard to reduce the film to approximately 90 minutes. Their reasoning was commercial. Shorter films meant more daily screenings, more tickets sold per theater, more revenue. Coppola fought this strenuously. He argued that the film's emotional impact was entirely dependent on its pacing and length, that cutting it to 90 minutes would destroy the very thing that made it work. He was backed in this position by editor William Reynolds and eventually by producer Robert Evans, who recognized what they had. The film was released at its full, unhurried length. Audiences sat for nearly 3 hours and then immediately wanted to watch it again. The executives who wanted 90 minutes were very quiet after opening weekend. Number 21. The Godfather changed Hollywood's business model permanently. Everything we've covered, the casting battles, the near disasters, the studio interference, the fight to preserve the film's vision, all of it feeds into the final, most consequential fact. The Godfather didn't just make a lot of money. It permanently changed how Hollywood operates. Before The Godfather, the conventional wisdom in the industry was that the era of the old studio blockbuster was over. Television had taken the mass audience, and cinema was fragmenting into smaller, more artistically diverse markets. Nobody expected a single film to dominate American culture the way the great studio pictures of the 40s and 50s had. The Godfather proved the audience was still there, enormous, hungry, and willing to show up in numbers that defied every expectation. But only for something genuinely great. The film demonstrated that adult drama, thoughtfully made, with real artistic ambition and serious performances, could generate commercial returns that dwarfed action films and comedies. It launched the careers of Coppola, Pacino, Duvall, Keaton, Caan, and Diane Keaton. It rehabilitated Marlon Brando's standing in the industry. It launched the new Hollywood era, the decade of the 1970s that produced Chinatown, Network, Taxi Driver, and Annie Hall. Every prestige drama you've watched since 1972. Every slow-burn crime story, every morally complex anti-hero narrative, every film that dared to take its time and trust the audience's intelligence, exists in the shadow of The Godfather. It opened a door that is never closed. And there you have it. 21 facts about The Godfather that prove the story behind the story is just as extraordinary as the film itself. 50 years on, this movie still teaches filmmakers, still astonishes audiences, and still rewards attention in a way that almost nothing else does. Which fact surprised you the most? The cotton balls? The real horsehead? The studio that wanted to cut it to 90 minutes? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know. If you enjoyed this deep dive, hit subscribe. We do this kind of thing all the time with the films and stories that actually deserve it. And I'll see you in the next one.